Hello and welcome back to the mines, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Hurricane guided rocket system, and we're going to be going over some builds for it. So let's begin with the pros and the cons of the Hurricane. And the major pros of the Hurricane are that it is extremely versatile. It's really good at pretty much everything. It has AoE, it has long range, it has potentially pretty good short range, it has pretty good DPS, it has pretty good single target damage. It has good crowd control, it's got better effects on it to where you can have fire or stuns on here. It's got a lot going for it, and it usually doesn't run through ammo very quickly either since it's a gunner primary weapon. The only major con to the Hurricane is sort of the slowish rate of fire. That one can be rough if things are getting right up in your face, but you are a gunner, so you can usually tank through that or put up your shield. So you do have some defenses for it, and kind of the slower reload. It's not as slow as the autocannon, but it is still a little bit slow. If you have Born Ready, this probably won't be that much of an issue though. Let's go over the vanilla build for the Hurricane. For this, I'm going to be using Karl.gg, a fantastic website that allows you to make all sorts of builds on it. I absolutely love this site. And in Tier 1, we have our three choices of extra ammo, more direct damage, or bigger AoE. All three of these are really good options for the Hurricane. They're all really good in their own way. Generally, I'll go with more ammo just so that I have more missiles overall, but pick whichever one of these you would like. If you like more single target damage and you want to take this on a Dreadnought, maybe the pressurized gas system. If you want more AoE, go with the bigger AoE. In Tier 2, we either have faster moving rockets or we got armor breaking. Generally, I'll go with armor breaking here. Armor breaking is a little bit bugged with explosive weapons like this, and it's not really bugged, it's just it works a little bit differently. So the explosive from the Hurricane doesn't really do armor breaking damage, but the direct impact from the rocket does. So armor breaking on this one is actually pretty decent because a lot of the time you're just going to be direct impacting enemies. You're probably not going to count on the splash damage actually tearing the armor off of enemies. So armor breaking is pretty nice. If you don't like that though, the faster moving projectiles is pretty good as well. In Tier 3, we either have a larger magazine, this actually doubles your magazine size, or we have an increased rate of fire. Usually I go with the rate of fire. The Hurricane, like I said, does have kind of a slow rate of fire, so giving it a little bit faster rate of fire feels a bit better to me, but it's not unusable, and the larger magazine size is pretty nice. It makes it so you can have really long sustained fire, so both these options are also quite good. Similar to like when we were talking about the Sludge Pump last time, which is another very versatile weapon, the Hurricane is also a versatile weapon with really good choices in pretty much every tier. In Tier 4, we have either increased weak spot damage or we have AoE damage. Again, both these are good. Usually I'll go with increased weak spot damage and just go for the headshots or the body shots wherever things are weak. But more AoE is also really good, especially if you don't want to be aiming directly at something. If you don't really care about hitting the weak spots, then go for that. And then in Tier 5, we have fire rounds, stun rounds, or increased rounds based on how far the missiles have traveled. Or how long the missiles have traveled, I should say, not really how far they've traveled. Nitroglycerin is a very awkward one, and it really only works for one overclock. It's not really the best for the Hurricane, although it can be fun to try to get it to work. So I would say experiment with it and try it, but I would probably go with stuns over everything else here. Stuns are just universally good. If you stun an enemy, it can't fight back, and the Hurricane can just get more damage in on it. This works for most enemies, unless the enemy can't be stunned, like if they're a Dreadnought or if they're a Oppressor. Then you can't stun them, but if you can stun them, this is really nice, especially for Praetorians and Guards. If you want to do the fire rounds, though, and do some more damage over time, you can absolutely do that. It's actually pretty good if you want to take that, and then you want to take something like Volatile Bolts on the Revolver. That can be a pretty decent option for the Hurricane, too. For a secondary weapon, your options are, once again, the Revolver, the Burst Pistol, or the Coil Gun for Gunner. For a Revolver build, I usually go with this, and this just gets me more damage. It has long range. You could, of course, take extra ammo in Tier 4 for this one, too, if you just want to be able to shoot things more. Works really well at just quickly sniping off enemies. Really good for picking off Cave Leeches, and really good for picking off Mactera, especially Trijaws. For the Burst Pistol build, I usually like running it like this, although you can take blow-through rounds. Anything in Tier 2 is really good, too, so you can adjust this however you'd like. If you think you need more ammo, you can go for that. If you want more damage, you can also go for that. Burst Pistol is also very versatile, so that's really nice. And then for the Coil Gun, I'll go with something like this. This is also really good for very long range for picking things off, especially if you want to just swap this out, fire it, hit something, and then swap back to the Hurricane and wait for Born Ready to reload it. That's really good. Let's go over the overclock builds and go with secondaries for them too. So our very first overclock is called Overtuned Feed Mechanism. This one gives you increased velocity for each of your rounds. This is by 20%, and it also gives you a faster rate of fire. This one's a really good clean overclock. This is really nice for the Hurricane. My build for the Hurricane only changes slightly here, where in Tier 3 I don't go with the extra rate of fire, and instead I go with the larger mag size, so I have 72 rounds in this. Makes it so the sustained fire is really good. The rate of fire isn't dropped since the overclock's buffing it, so that's really nice. And I just have faster moving missiles. You can build this however you'd like most clean overclocks. It's just a very solid overclock. You could also take the increased rate of fire in tier 3. It's actually really fun to have a fast shooting hurricane too, because it will rip through things really quick. For a secondary weapon for this one, I decided to take composite casings for the burst pistol, and this one is basically the same but for the burst pistol, where this gives me extra ammo and it gives me a faster rate of fire. I have it built the same way. This is another clean overclock, so you can build it however you'd like. These two in combination work really well as just a general purpose build that can do everything. It's good at long range, it's good at close range, it's good for sustained fire, it's good for saving ammo. You get a lot of ammo overall, so you don't run through it very quick. You can play defensive or offensive with this. Super solid, super flexible build that I really enjoy. There's plenty of other overclocks you could pair this with. The clean one by itself is really good. With anything else on it, it's also really good. So if you want higher damage on your secondary to kill big things like maybe dreadnoughts or praetorians or whatever a little bit quicker, you could absolutely do that. Or if you want more AoE, you could also do that. You could take something like Hellfire on the coil gun and you'd have a really good weapon there. Our second clean overclock is fragmentation missiles. This one's also another really solid overclock. So this one's another clean one that gives you 2 more area damage and it gives you a bigger AoE radius. I really like this one, and it's really good for stacking even more AoE on it, so this is the build that I'm running. More AoE in tier 1 really helps. You could go with the armor breaking or the faster moving speed in tier 2. They're both pretty good. Again, armor breaking works a little bit weird and doesn't really work with the AoE. More area damage, more rate of fire, and stuns on this. This one's really solid. It's really good for clearing up crowds and increasing your area of effect radius. Pretty much doubles the overall size that your missiles were able to actually cover. That's really nice, and it's really good for the crowds. It's decent towards single targets, because since it's still extra damage, so even on like dreadnought missions, this isn't really going to be a downgrade to your gun. It's still going to be an upgrade over the regular Hurricane. For a secondary weapon for this build, I decided to take triple tech chambers for the coil gun. This allows me to fire up to 3 shots from my coil gun, although you don't have to, you just get the option to. The second 2 shots cannot punch through the ground like the first shot, and they do reduce damage. They also consume reduced ammo when you're shooting them. But this one can be pretty solid, and it's decent, especially if you want to take the electricity in tier 5. That makes it so that you can just clear up crowds really easy and just keep stun locking them. So you can use this fired into a crowd, stun them all with the electricity, then fire the fragmentation missiles in, and you'll probably clear up the crowd really quick. This one works really well in combination with anything. It's again another clean overclock for the Hurricane, so you can pick whatever you'd like as a secondary option. Up next, we got plasma burster missiles. This is a balanced overclock, and this one did get buffed, I think since the last time I talked about it, where this one has better pathing now, which is really good. It used to also be bugged to where it could one-shot the flying rocks too on escort missions. That doesn't work anymore. It still clears them up really fast, but this one fires out a missile that does less damage, but it can explode multiple times. That's pretty good. It comes at the downside of losing out on overall damage, losing out on ammo, losing out on explosive radius, and also losing out on speed. So it loses out on quite a lot of things, but it does make it so you can do a lot of damage towards single targets, because you can just fire out a bunch of these missiles, hold it on one target, and they'll just keep flying back through and do a lot of damage that way. The way I like to build it is like this. So in tier 1 I'm going with extra ammo, but extra damage is pretty good here too. Extra AoE I wouldn't recommend. Probably go with ammo or damage. That one's going to be better. You're not really using these for the AoE. I know some people like the movement speed because they find the rockets to be a little bit slow. I don't mind them, but if that's the case, then feel free to take that. Increased rate of fire in tier 3. Weak spot damage in tier 4 is really good with these ones because you can just keep hitting the weak spots over and over and over again. So that's really nice, especially on big enemies like Praetorians or Oppressors or Dreadnoughts. You just fire a bunch of them and just hold it on it, and then you'll just watch them go back and forth and just keep cutting it up. And then in tier 5, the stun. Stun is also quite good with this. Fire's actually not too bad with this either if you just want to light things on fire quickly. This one can do it. It does reduce your damage a little bit more, but if you're taking this with like volatile bullets, might not be a bad option. This is also pretty much the only overclock that can make use of the nitroglycerin compound too in tier 5. Where this one you can realistically keep in the air for quite a while, and since it can keep going through enemies and explode multiple times, it does potentially get more value from that. It's still more awkward to do, but if you're going to be using that particular tier 5, this one is probably the best one to be doing it with. For a secondary weapon, you can honestly pick just about anything because this one still works quite well at most jobs. For me, I decided to go with 6-shooter for the revolver. This one is a really good overclock where it just increases my rate of fire, increases my ammo, increases my mag size, and increases my spread, but it does make it so I can shoot the revolver really quick at close range at enemies. For this, I'm running basically the same build that I'd recommend for my vanilla revolver. This is just a straight upgrade to the revolver in my opinion, and it allows me to just pull this out really quickly and shoot things up close. That's what I'm going to be using this for most of the time. However, the long range capability of it is still pretty good. It's still a revolver, so if you do need to snipe off things like acid or web spitters, you can still totally do that. Up next, we got Minelayer System, and this is another balanced overclock. This one is really strong. So this turns all of your rockets into mines, at least once they hit the ground. If they hit an enemy directly, they work the same way as your regular missiles do, so that's fine. But this makes it so whenever they stick into the ground, then it takes a second for them to arm, and anything walking across them takes damage. These mines are increased in damage since they give you more AoE damage as well as base damage on the mine, and the AoE damage is based off of your own AoE damage on the Hurricane, so you do want to be taking that for this. So for this build, I'm running it a little bit differently. I'm still running ammo in tier 1, but damage and AoE radius is still really good with this if you want to take those. Increased movement speed in tier 2. I find this is a little bit better for just setting up the mines quickly, but if you like the armor breaking, you can take that. Faster rate of fire in tier 3. More AoE damage in tier 4, I'd highly recommend that one. And then the stuns in tier 5, although fire mines can be pretty good too, especially if you're not going on like a dreadnought mission, where this works really well for lighting crowds on fire, because the mines get you more value per shot than pretty much every overclock that the Hurricane has, with the exception of maybe plasma bursters. Plasma bursters might get you a little bit more if you can get a lot of value out of them, but they're less guaranteed, at least towards crowds, as opposed to Minelayer System, which is really, really good for crowds. You can actually just kind of sit in place and then just shoot these all around you, and most enemies can't get close to you, assuming that they're melee enemies. This isn't going to work as well on like Plague, unless you get really enclosed caves, and then it can still work fine. Or the new Duck and Cover. Duck and Cover is also not as good at this because enemies will stay at a distance and they will just keep trying to shoot you. For a secondary weapon, you probably want something that can actually have range. For me, I didn't actually take that really because I wanted to have more of a theme setup with electro minelets for the burst pistol. This one's kind of a funny one. You can still use the burst pistol normally. I do have blow-through rounds on here for the electro minelets though, because if you shoot through an enemy, you can then stick the mine behind them, and then this can also set off and zap enemies. Electro minelets are really solid too. You don't need to have this combination though. Honestly, it's probably not best if you have this combination. You probably want more single target damage that's more reliable. So you might want to go with something like composite casings for the burst pistol, or you might want to go with anything for the coil gun really, or you might want to go with, again, like 6-shooter for the revolver. Moving on to the unstable overclocks, which we have quite a few of. We have Jet Fuel Homebrew as our next one. This one gives you more direct damage, more velocity, but it does make it so you have less AoE, less mag size, and less ammo. So this kind of turns your Hurricane more into a hit scan weapon, which can be decent. It's actually pretty good on dreadnought missions. The way I'm building it is like this. So at tier 1, I'm going with more damage, armor breaking, faster rate of fire, more weak spot damage, and stuns. This is really good for taking out big enemies. You can also one-shot headshot grunts with this, or two-shot body shot them. This overclock is a little bit awkward because you can run through ammo with it fairly fast, and if you're not used to the projectile speed with this one, it can get a little bit rough trying to hit bigger enemies because you might just end up throwing these past the enemy pretty much because they don't steer very much. For a secondary weapon, I would recommend something for AoE damage, and for this I'm going to be taking Hellfire with the coil gun, which I think in the footage I'm actually using 6-shooter because I switched that off beforehand by accident. So Hellfire with the coil gun is what I would recommend, and this is the way that I build it. So this way I can just clear up crowds with this, and then I can use the homebrew powder to just take out big enemies or take out crowds quickly. It does really well at that, but you will want to keep going and getting nitra because you can run through ammo pretty fast with this particular build. Our next overclock is called Salvo Module. This one turns your Hurricane basically into a rocket shotgun. So this one makes it so you can no longer hold down the fire button to actually just fire out rockets and then aim them or steer them. You can still aim them. You can still steer rockets if you fire them out one at a time though. That's fine. If you're just tap firing this, then the Hurricane works exactly the same as it did before. It's a little bit more effort to do that, and if you do that, it actually doesn't come at any downside. So the Hurricane is still pretty good in that regard. It's a little bit awkward. If you hold down the trigger though, this can charge up to 8 rockets in all the barrels, and then you can fire this out like a shotgun. This can do really high damage and really high damage per second because of the shotgun effect. So that's really nice. The way that I like to build it is like this. So in tier 1, going with extra ammo. Again, tier 1 is your choice though. I just like ammo to have more of it, but the other options are really good too. Tier 2 armor breaking. This one's actually quite good for beating up on crowds because you can just charge up like 3 of these at a time. And you don't have to charge this all the way to 9. You can just charge it up a little bit and then let it go. Tier 3 is kind of important because I like the rate of fire. The rate of fire does increase the charge rate, so that's pretty good. AoE damage in tier 4 is really good. You get more damage the more rockets you have charged up with this, so more AoE damage is even better for that. And then the stuns in tier 5 is just a solid option, but fire is really good for this one too if you just want to instantly ignite stuff. So if you're taking volatile bullets again with the revolver, this one is a pretty solid option. I'm not taking that. Instead, I'm actually taking the burst fire pistol, and for this I'm taking compact mags, which has increased ammo overall, but reduces your reload speed and reduces your rate of fire. This one's just a very solid overclock. I'm going to be taking it the same way I usually take my burst pistol, but you can take whatever you'd like. In tier 2, I would recommend either the faster reload speed or the increased rate of fire though. Those two are generally better because they at least make up for one of the two weaknesses that you got thanks to this. So pick whichever one of those that you dislike more. Up next, we've got Rocket Barrage. Rocket Barrage is a super fun overclock that just spews out rockets across the board. It's really fun. This one gives you way more ammo. It also gives you a much higher rate of fire, but it does make it so you're reduced on overall damage and overall area damage. You can kind of make up for that if you want to go with damage in tier 1 and area damage in tier 4. For my build, I'm running it like this. So in tier 1, I'm going with damage. This is just to make up for the loss of damage. You could do this in tier 1 and tier 4 if you'd like, if you just want to hit a little bit harder. I don't find that that's as necessary. I just like going with one or the other. You don't really need ammo for this one. You just get so much of it. Extra AoE is also pretty decent with this one. Increased speed on the tier 2s. I just like the rockets getting to the enemy as quickly as possible, although armor breaking is pretty good here too. Increased mag size in tier 3. This is so that I have a large enough magazine to keep firing this out, because you can eat through that 36 round magazine pretty fast with Rocket Barrage. Weak spot damage in tier 4, so I can hit a little bit harder, assuming that I am hitting the weak spots, and then stuns in tier 5, although fire in tier 5 is pretty fun too. These rockets are also non-guided, so you do just have to fire them all out. It's similar to the Salvo Module or the Minelayer System we talked about, but this one you just shotgun it out pretty much, or machine gun it out with all these rockets. For a secondary for this, I decided to take the revolver with elephant rounds. I have a lot of rockets in the Hurricane. I can shoot them out really fast. They're pretty good for crowd control. I don't really do that much against big enemies, so my secondary will be for that. And the elephant revolver is pretty good at that. It does really high damage, but I don't have very many shots. This is the way I'm building it, so faster reload speed, more ammo, more weak spot damage. It's pretty good at taking out enemies at a distance, and I can pretty much use this as a pocket sniper. So if I see a tri-job, pull it out, snipe it. That's pretty good. I see a leech, pull it out, snipe it. I'm going to be only using this for big enemies. You could do the same thing with the coil gun if you wanted to go with mole. That one's really good too. That way you could just punch through surfaces and do really high damage, or just use it like the standard coil gun and it still does quite high damage. And then our last overclock is the newest overclock, which is called cluster charges. This one is really cool. This one doubles your overall damage, both in terms of AoE damage and in terms of regular shot damage with this. That's really nice, but this does come at the cost of your magazine size being smaller, quite a bit smaller, you having a lot less ammo, which is a downside, but you can splinter these into fragments. The fragments did get nerfed recently. Its ammo got nerfed and its fragments got nerfed. They already lowered its ammo quite a bit, but they lowered it even more. And then the fragments used to be 9 fragments, I believe, and I think it's down to 7 now. So it's not as much damage. In order to set these off, just hold in your reload button and this will set off all the rockets that have been shot. This can work essentially as a very precision shotgun strike, I guess. I don't know, it's kind of a weird way to describe it, but you want to get these kind of close to enemies and then you can set them off and then it just explodes right in their face, and then you have the fragments just to hit all over them. That is a lot of damage, potentially. It's kind of hard to do that, especially if you don't have great depth perception like me. So it might be a little bit difficult to do that, but even if you're just using this normally, you're essentially just trading your overall amount of ammo that you have just for more area damage and more direct damage. So that's not necessarily a bad thing either. You can still just use this as a regular Hurricane and you'll do just fine. The way I like building it is like this, so I'm going with increased ammo in tier 1. This is just to make up for the loss of ammo. You could just go with more damage here if you'd like to. That's also pretty good. Armor breaking in tier 2, but increased missile speed is pretty good as well, because this one does nerf your projectile speed as well, so if you're used to the regular missile speed, maybe go with that one. Increased rate of fire in tier 3 to make up for the loss of rate of fire from this one. Increased area damage, and then stuns in tier 5. Although fire in tier 5 is also pretty fun with this one. This actually pairs well with most of the secondary weapons, so if you'd like to pair it with really anything, go for it. I like going with more AoE, and for me personally, I'm taking this with magic bullets on the revolver, and this one I'm just building all for AoE. So I'm going to be using the revolver just to spam it pretty much anything that gets close to me, because the Hurricane, at least with this particular overclock, isn't really the best at using at very close range quickly. It is good at longer and medium range though, where you can just keep hammering away at enemies, and where you can make better use of the actual explosive missiles. So cluster charges is really solid across the board too. And that would be all the builds I'd recommend for the Hurricane. Tell me your thoughts on the Hurricane guided missile system down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. What builds do you like running, and what do you think of the new overclock? I hope this helped you out, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye bye everybody.